In this video, we're going to show you how to work with Blender's rigid body object physics in here so you can make your Rube Goldberg project. And you'll find out that these are actually fun little features to play around with and really not too difficult. Now, as I work through this video, you'll notice that I have my screen key commands showing up down here in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So if you're wondering what key or button I'm hitting, it will show you down here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my properties panel on the side a little bit wider so you can see all of the buttons and all of the settings in here. And as you work through this physics and you hit the play button, as your animation grows and becomes longer, after you get past 250 frames worth of animation, you're going to know that things just stop and freeze up on the screen. It's like, well, why did it do that? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do is go to this third button over at the top for your scene, and you're going to see a collapsed panel for rigid body cache. And this is how much memory the computer's using to save your animation as you play it. So right now, when you open up this rigid body cache panel, you'll see it starts at frame 1, ends at frame 250. And you're probably going to have a much longer animation. So I would just say for right now, click on that end button and type in 2000. And if you find out it still isn't long enough, because some of you will probably make a very long animation, you can go back in here into the scene buttons and hit the rigid body cache and increase that end frame so that you know your animation is going to play all the way through. So just be aware that if you hit the play button down here as you're watching your animation and things just stop at a certain point, this is what's going on. You passed the rigid body cache frame. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is set up my scene. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure I'm using an user ortho view. Remember, you usually start out in perspective, and that's number pad 5 to get into an ortho view. So most of the time when you're trying to set things up, you're going to want to work in normal views, like number 7 on the number pad for a top view, number 1 for a front view, number 3 for a side view. So for our first example, I'm not going to really pay much attention to that. I'm going to set up a scene right now. I'm going to have a cube. I'm going to have a UV sphere, so I'm going to go to the Create menu. I'm going to create myself a UV sphere. I'm going to create myself a plane that's going to represent my ground. So let's scale the plane up for my ground. Now I'm going to look at it in number 7, a top view, because my origin point was a little off, so I'm going to keep it where it's at. Pull the plane down, keep it a little bit above the grid, move it around. Okay, so that's going to be my ground that everything's going to bounce on. So let's see. I'm going to look at my scenes here. I'm going to make sure the sphere is just a little bit off the ground and below the cube, just so they react with each other. I'm going to start out with the cube. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this cube into an active rigid body actor. So I go over to the little bouncing ball button in my properties buttons, and I'm going to enable rigid body on the cube, and by default it's already an active type. It could be active or passive. It's dynamic, it has a mass, so you can make things heavier or lighter so that they react differently to each other. The rigid body collision shape is something you're going to want to pay attention to. By default, it comes in as a convex hull. What a convex hull basically means is it's like taking your shape and shrink wrapping plastic around it. So let's say you had a donut that you covered in plastic and you shrink wrapped it around the donut. The hole would be covered with plastic and it would not let something fall through the middle of it. So convex hull, basically the shape is how well the computer is going to calculate the real shape of the object. And some of them basically use less physics, meaning the computer will run faster. So box, sphere, cube, convex hull, they're going to work reasonably well, but for our type of physics, we're probably going to want to use mesh, which will actually use the real mesh of your shape. I'll show you later what convex hull does in a sample. So I'm going to do mesh. You have friction, how much things are going to react and slide against each other, how bouncy something is. We'll play with all of those in a few minutes. So far all I've done is enabled rigid body actor, made him active, and I just did mesh. I hit the play button down here. Make sure you're always on frame 1 when you start. And boom, the cube falls, and it falls forever. Stop, go back to frame 1. So the reason why it's falling through the plane is right now the plane is not a rigid body actor yet. So I have to go in, select the right click to select the plane, go to rigid body, and I'm going to make this passive. If I keep it active, then they're both going to fall, and they'll fall forever. So I have to make the plane passive. Now I hit play, boom, cube reacts to it. Okay, looks good. So let's take the sphere, and I'm going to make him a rigid body for my first example, I'm just going to make that passive so it sits still. So here's my scene, I hit play, and boom, cube reacts to it. Let's go back and try some other examples with this. Let's take the cube, and instead of a mesh, let's try convex hull. See if it reacts any differently. And as that falls, notice that one likes to bounce a little bit more, right? When it was a mesh, it didn't actually react quite that much. So you have to kind of see how things work with this. It acts a little bit differently. What happens if I made it be a sphere? If I make the cube be a sphere, it's going to roll like it's a cube, or like it's a sphere. Okay, not act like a cube anymore. So I'm going to keep it at mesh. For what we're doing, mesh is probably going to be the best option. Okay, boom. Okay, well, what happens if I mess with like the bounciness of the cube? Take the bounciness way up. Okay, let's see if anything happens. And it probably won't. Nope, I don't see too much difference. Okay, that's because with the floor, I have to turn up the bounciness with it as well. I know that doesn't make sense in real life, but there's got to be bounciness on both objects for them to be able to react to each other. So now the cube's got a little bit of bounce to it. And it actually goes off the edge of the plane now. Okay, well, let's take bounciness down. Let's mess with friction. Oops. Let's mess with friction now. So without any bounciness and with friction set at 0.5, there's what you got. Let's take the friction all the way down. Oops. I'm going to keep the friction up on the plane. But I'm going to select the cube and take the friction down on the plane, on the cube. So now when I make this work, you'll see that the cube slides a lot. You don't need to change the friction on both objects, just the one object that you're working with. So let's take friction back up. Let's make the friction be 1. Okay, so that's going to stick like sandpaper now. There's no extra movement at all there. Okay, so you got a lot of things you can play around with here to make it work out. Let's take that sphere now. Let's turn that into an active actor. Hit play. I didn't change the collision bounds on it, but you see that it hit that and it started to roll a little bit. Let's take the friction down on the sphere a little bit. Okay, that's moving a little bit more. How about if we take the mass down on the sphere? Because mass is set to 1 by default. Let's take that way down, so this will be like a styrofoam ball with a wooden ball hitting, or wooden cube hitting it. See, it really pushes it out. So you can play around with these physics settings all you want to change the effects and how they work. Okay. So we've got that going so far. Well, let's change some things around here right now. So I'm going to actually turn this cube into a domino. So that means I'm going to have to scale it in the X, Y, and Z to make it a good size. So I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'm going to hit X, Y, or Z while I'm in the scale command. So there I'm scaling only in the X direction. And I'm going to scale in the Z direction, which is up and down. Now it's about the proportions of a domino. Well, now I need to put it on the ground. This is where you need to start focusing on your principal view. So I'm going to go to a number 1 on the number pad for a front view. I'm going to pull that down close to where the ground's at. I'm not quite sure where the ground's at. Sometimes it's hard to see when you're in solid view. So I'm going to go down here and switch to wireframe. Switch my view to wireframe. I need to be up off the ground just a little tiny bit. Okay, now let's switch back to solid view again. Alright. So things look a little more interesting. I'm going to stick a material on this cube right now. So I'm going to go to my material ball over here in my material settings. And I'm just going to go down to the diffuse color, click on this little white swatch, and let's make that kind of a blue. Move off of it, now it's a blue one. Now you're going to have to notice that you're going to have to get your settings set up for this thing before you make too many dominoes. It's kind of hard to go back and change everything later on. So go back to physics. So I have a domino sitting there now. Now I'm going to select the sphere, and I'm going to have the sphere fall and start the domino chain. So I'm going to go to a number 7, a top view. I'm going to move that sphere just like it's going to be like right over top. Number 1, a front view. I'm going to pull that sphere up. Spin my view. And now when I hit play, that sphere should knock the domino over. Perfect. Wow, that looks great. Stop. Go back to frame 1. Select my domino. Actually, let's make the floor a little bit bigger. Right click on the floor, scale that up so I have something bigger to work with. 7, top view. Select the domino. Shift D to duplicate, make a copy of something. Shift D, make another copy. Shift D, make another copy. How do I turn a corner? Shift D, place it, hit R to rotate. It is crucial that you are in a top ortho view, number 7 on the number pad. Because if you're in a spun view, you're going to be putting these things up in the air, down into the ground, and things aren't going to stay flat and react well. Now before I make too many dominoes, I'm going to make sure that they work. Okay, so I'm going to hit play and make sure that they all fall the way that they should. And they're doing pretty good. If you're having trouble with the dominoes falling properly, you might have to change its rigid body collision, change its shape to a mesh or convex hull, depending on what you think works better. You might have to mess with the friction. You might have to mess with the mass. Don't do too many of them yet because you want to make sure it works before you do a lot of them, because you're going to have to go through and you're going to have to set the properties for each one or delete them and recopy the original one again. Okay, so make sure everything's set right on those couple. So I'll duplicate a couple more. Shift D, I'm back in the top view again, number 7. R to rotate, G to grab, Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate, G to grab, Shift D, R, grab, Shift D, rotate. I'm going to make this one kind of flat, grab, just like setting up real dominoes. Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. All right, let's see what that looks like. So let's hit play, and bam. Oh, we got a beautiful domino chain going on. Okay, a little sluggish, but that's okay. It's working. Ooh, that one goes crazy. Okay, so what can we do next? I had mentioned to you about the convex hull and the different type of shapes that you can work with. Let me add a tube for this domino to go through. So my bullseye's right there right now. I'm going to hit, go over here to the create menu. I'm going to create a cylinder. Now when you create a cylinder by default, it's closed off. When you create an object, you have to go down here in the tool shelf and look at your properties before you try to move it or do anything. These properties only work right after you create the object, but it says cap fill, end gone. I want nothing for my caps, so it's a hollow tube. All right, so I changed the cap fill to nothing down here after I created that. Now if I try to move it, these options are no longer here. Okay, so you have to do it right after you create the object. So let's scale that up a little bit. I'm going to scale it in the Z direction. So I hit Z to make it longer, S and Z to scale it. Now I got this nice long tube. Wow, okay, let's rotate the tube. Let's grab it, point it like that, like it's gonna, ball's gonna come down the tube and hit the domino. But if I look at it from a top view, in number 7, it's not lined up, so let's put it like right there. I'm gonna move it a little bit closer. Okay, so I got the tube shooting right at that thing. All right, now I gotta get the ball up to the top of the tube. I can use the arrows to do this. By the way, I'm holding down the mouse wheel while I hold down the shift key to pan. Hold down the mouse wheel like it's a button, hold down the shift to pan. Yeah, most of you guys are probably pretty familiar with that, but it's easy to forget. Okay, so I'm gonna put this ball right at the beginning of the tube. Okay, so let's see if this works now. So if I hit play right now, nothing's going to happen correctly because I did not turn the tube into an actor yet. So I need to take the tube, add a rigid body constraint, make him passive. Now if I leave it at convex hull, this is probably not going to work correctly. Boom, you see how it flies out of there? Because it's acting like it's in an embedded state, even though it looks like it's a hollow tube. It's like a shrink wrap piece of plastic going across. The convex hull just shrink wraps around an object. It doesn't recognize holes. So I have to change convex hull into a mesh. Now when I hit play, boom, now we got the ball rolling down the tube, and it collides with the domino, and things start rolling. And you get the basics on how this all works. Now, last thing I want to show you is how do you make a lever, because this is one thing I'd like everybody to try to play around with. How do you make a lever? Like this domino would fall and hit a lever and make the lever spin. Okay, so first thing I got to do is get my bullseye someplace where I think I can make it work. So I'm going to move the little bullseye with the left mouse button over here somewhere in the top view. Number 1, front view, let's put it up a little higher. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to add a new cube. So I'm going to go over to my Create menu, add a new cube. Let's scale it, S, just make the whole thing smaller. And I'm going to scale, I believe, in the Y direction. Yeah, that's what I want. Scale Y. So scale X, scale Y. There's my lever. And that pivot point is what it's going to spin on, right in the middle. So you want to try to keep that pivot point in the middle. Now, if you read the Blender book, the tutorial, which I have over here, we talk about putting a little post underneath that lever. You can do that. It makes it look more realistic, like, hey, you know, the lever's sitting in something rather than floating in space. But you don't have to, because instead of child parenting the lever to the post, I'm just going to right now child parent the lever to the floor. Even though they don't touch each other, that works out. Okay, so let's do this then. So let's go back over here to Canvas, over to Blender, I mean. I have my lever selected. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is make it a rigid body actor. It doesn't matter, I'm just going to keep it on convex hull. So I hit play, it falls to the ground. Boom, and then the ball comes down the tube and hits the dominoes, and everything keeps going. Okay, so escape out of that, go back to frame 1. Alright, so what I need to do is I need to add a rigid body constraint to it. So again, I'm still here in the physics button. So rigid body constraint to that plank. Okay, so if I scroll down, here's the rigid body constraint that I just added. Now right now its hinge type is fixed, meaning it can't move. So I need to change it to a hinge. Feel free to try some of the other ones out. You could make it be a point and it could spin in all directions. I'm just going to go with hinge. That keeps it locked in one axis. Object 1 that I have to trigger to is the actual thing that it's anchored to. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper here. Click the eyedropper, click on the floor. Boom. And it shows up now on the list. Object 2 is actually the plank that I'm working with. So eyedropper, click that, cube, boom. Okay. Now let's hit play and see what happens. And it still fell. Okay, did I get the right cube? No, that's cube 13. I picked cube 11. Got to be careful which cube you pick. It always tells you which cube is selected by this. I'm going to rotate this a little better so I don't make that mistake again. Apparently I got the domino. So, exit out of that one. Still kept the plane selected because that was correct. I have to pick the actual cube 13 itself. Now let's hit play. It should sit in the air. There we go. It doesn't go anywhere. And as the ball falls, it's going to hit the domino, set the train started, and it's going to hit the plank, and the plank is going to spin like a lever. So what could I do with that? Well, I'm going to duplicate that domino. Number 7 on my number pad, top view. And I can't even see the plank because it all blends together, so I'm going to go to wireframe. There's the plank. Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to put one domino here. I'm just going to copy these dominoes, Shift D. Hold down your Shift key when you right click for multiple selection in case you've forgotten. Let's hit play. Oops, I did not start on frame 1. Start on frame 1. Play. Hits the lever, should start the next one going. Now, that's interesting. Okay, why did it not finish it? Well, even though I changed the rigid body cache to 2,000 frames, I'm still only seeing frame 1 to 250. So you gotta start taking that end frame up. Start increasing that end frame, and I'll just keep dragging on it. Make it longer and longer. Make it as long as you need it to be to show everything that's going on. Okay, and that's the basics of the physics engine. When you're ready to create a movie, I would just use your phone and just videotape your screen as it plays and then submit that for the assignment. So have some fun.